Hi there. Today we are going to pull back the heavy embroidered curtain on medieval marriage and reveal what it was truly like. Imagine you are 12 years old and your wedding is tomorrow. The man you're marrying is a stranger twice your age, but his lands border your father's, and that is all that matters. Or picture your wedding night. The room filled with the boisterous drunken laughter of friends and family, all waiting outside the bed curtains, or even inside the room, to witness the consummation that makes your union legally binding. This isn't a romance. For most people, it was a grim contract. Honestly, given the lack of plumbing and the prevalence of the plague, you probably won't survive this trip back in time anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always lovely to know who's listening, so feel free to drop your location and what time it is, where you are, in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Forget the fairy tales you've been told. Erase the images of knights in shining armor, pledging eternal devotion to a fair maiden. While those stories existed for the vast majority of people in medieval Europe, they were just that, stories. The reality of marriage was far less enchanting. It was a dark, oppressive, and deeply pragmatic institution that had almost nothing to do with love, and even less to do with personal choice. This was a world where a wedding vow was less a promise of partnership and more the final click of a lock on a cage. First, it's important to clarify which olden days we're talking about. Your mind might jump to the Victorian era with its strict social codes and repressed sensibilities, but that's a different chapter of history entirely. We are venturing much further back into the long, sprawling epic known as the Middle Ages, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 15th century. This is a time before widespread literacy, before unified nations as we know them, and before the very concept of individualism had taken root. Life here is raw, communal, and intensely local. Your world is your village, your allegiance is to your feudal lord, and the overarching authority in all matters spiritual and legal is the church. In this world, you are not seen as a unique individual with dreams and desires. You are a component of a larger organism, your family, and your family's primary objective is survival and advancement. Whether you are a noble or a peasant, your life is not your own. It belongs to your lineage. Your marriage, therefore, is not your decision to make. It is one of the most valuable assets your family possesses, a strategic card to be played to secure wealth-forge alliances, or simply ensure there are enough hands to work the fields next season. The idea that you should be in love with the person you marry would be met with bewildered stares and perhaps a bit of pity. Love was considered a dangerous, frivolous emotion, a form of youthful madness that had no place in the serious business of structuring society. The legal framework for this system was provided by canon law, the law of the church, and under this law, the minimum age for a valid marriage was set at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. This wasn't based on any notion of emotional maturity, but on the grimly practical benchmark of puberty. If you were old enough to bear children, you were old enough to be married off to produce them. Think about that for a moment. At an age where a modern child is navigating middle school, you could be legally bound for life, preparing to run a household and produce an heir for a man you barely knew. Your feelings on the matter were entirely irrelevant. Historians still argue whether the concept of courtly love, that highly stylized romantic code of conduct celebrated in the poems of troubadours, ever truly seeped into the reality of aristocratic life. Was it a genuine, albeit secret, emotional outlet for knights and ladies trapped in loveless marriages? Or was it merely a sophisticated literary game, a way to pass the time in drafty castles, completely divorced from the cold, hard transactions of their actual unions? The evidence is tantalizingly ambiguous, but for most people, love was something you hoped might grow with time, like a patch of sturdy cabbage. But you certainly didn't base a lifelong commitment on it. This transactional mindset gave rise to some rather unsettling customs. Take, for instance, the practice of a bride price, or more commonly, as the period progressed, the dowry. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a cold, hard business deal. A dowry was the wealth money, land, livestock, or goods that you, the bride, brought into the marriage. It was a payment from your family to the grooms, essentially compensating them for the burden of taking you on. A large dowry could elevate your family's status, while a small one could doom you to a less advantageous match, or even a life in a convent. The negotiations could be as complex and ruthless as any modern corporate merger, with your entire future hanging on the value of a few acres of land or a handful of silver coins. It's not exactly the stuff of sonnets. So as you stand on the precipice of this world, understand that you are a commodity. A precious one, perhaps, but a commodity nonetheless. Your worth is measured in property. Your purpose is defined by procreation. And your happiness is a luxury that the medieval world simply cannot afford. You are a commodity, and a commodity must be traded. Let's imagine the scene. You are sitting on a hard wooden bench along the wall of your family's hall. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke roasted meat and the faint, ever-present scent of unwashed humanity. Your father is at the main table, sharing a jug of ale with another man, a neighbor whose lands are frustratingly, tantalizingly fertile. You are not part of the conversation, but you are its entire subject. You watch them gesture, their voices rising and falling. They aren't discussing your wit, your kindness, or your secret dream of learning to read. They are talking about the number of cows that will come with you, the quality of the 3 linen shifts your mother has spent a year weaving for your dowry, and the precise boundary line that will be redrawn between their properties once the marriage contract is sealed. This is how it's done. Marriage is not a private affair, a secret whispered between 2 lovers. It is a public transaction, an open negotiation conducted by the heads of families. Your role is to sit quietly, look healthy, and not do anything to jeopardize the deal. For the nobility, these negotiations are the very stuff of politics and power. A marriage can end a multi-generational blood feud, or conversely start a new one. It can unite 2 great houses to challenge a king, or secure a strategic castle that controls a vital trade route. Your hand in marriage is a political tool as valuable as a company of knights or a chest of gold. Your personal happiness doesn't even enter the equation. The primary question is, how does this union strengthen the family? For the vast majority of people, the peasants who worked the land, the stakes were lower, but the transaction was just as critical, if not more so. A marriage negotiation in a peasant cottage was about pure survival. Can this boy plow a straight furrow? Is this girl strong enough to survive multiple childbirths and still manage the back-breaking labor of the household? The negotiation might involve combining two small struggling strips of land into one more viable farm. It could be about acquiring a son-in-law who has a valuable skill like blacksmithing or carpentry. One of the light jokes of the era, if you could call it that, is how the contract might even include a clause about who gets custody of the best milking cow. It's all about the details. Your future isn't written in the stars. It's written in a landowner's ledger, probably on the same page as a tally of his grain sacks. Once the terms were agreed upon, the process became even more public. This is where a mainstream historical fact comes into play: the banns of marriage. This was a mandatory proclamation. The priest would announce the names of the intended couple, your name and his, from the church pulpit for 3 consecutive Sundays. This served a very practical purpose. It gave anyone in the community a chance to voice a legal objection. Perhaps the man was already married to someone in another village, or you were related within the forbidden degrees of kinship, a complex web of rules laid out by the church. Imagine standing in the small, crowded church, hearing your name linked to a practical stranger, your fate announced to every person you've ever known. It was the medieval equivalent of changing your relationship status online, except it was irreversible and legally binding. There was no quiet backing out. The whole community was now a witness. At some point in this process, you would be formally presented for inspection. It's as dehumanizing as it sounds. You'd be trotted out before your potential future in-laws, who would look you over with a critical eye. They weren't looking for beauty, but for signs of utility. They'd check your teeth, your posture, your hands, and your hips. They were assessing you as one might assess livestock for your potential to produce healthy offspring and perform a lifetime of labor. It was a livestock show, really, but with slightly more formal attire and significantly worse prospects for a blue ribbon. Historians still debate the precise level of agency that young people, particularly daughters, had in these negotiations. The official line, both legally and socially, was that they had none. A child owed absolute obedience to their parents. To refuse a match chosen by your father was an act of defiance, not just against your family, but against the entire social and divine order. Yet court records and letters from the period occasionally show glimmers of resistance. A daughter who protested loudly and consistently enough might, in very rare cases, persuade a father to reconsider, especially if she threatened to run away or join a convent, which would mean losing the dowry entirely. But these were exceptional cases. For most, any protest was met with threats, pressure, and the unassailable argument, "It is your duty." A quirky and much debated tidbit from this era is the practice of hand fasting. In some regions, particularly in the British Isles and Germanic cultures, a formal betrothal could be sealed simply by the couple joining hands in front of witnesses and making a public pledge. This could sometimes serve as a kind of trial marriage lasting a year and a day. While its exact legal standing varied and changed over time, it highlights the central theme: marriage was a public contract, witnessed and enforced by the community long before it was a religious sacrament celebrated inside a church. The simple physical act of clasping hands in the marketplace was a sign to everyone that a deal had been struck. You were now spoken for. The transaction was the public transaction we just witnessed. The cold haggling over your future is grim enough. But what if it happened even earlier? What if the ink on the contract was dry before you could even write your own name? Let's turn the clock back even further. You are not a teenager, on the cusp of marriageable age. You are 7 years old. You stand in the center of the same smoky hall, but the world seems so much larger. The adults towering over you are giants, their faces a mixture of solemnity and a strange forced cheerfulness. You're wearing a new tunic, and it's horribly itchy. Your mother keeps smoothing it down her hands, trembling slightly. Across from you stands a boy, maybe 9 or 10, looking just as lost and uncomfortable as you feel. You are told he is to be your husband one day. The word husband means nothing to you. You are far more concerned with whether you'll still be allowed to play with your treasured wooden horse after today. You have your priorities, after all. This is the world of childhood betrothal. In the medieval mindset, waiting until a child was of marriageable age to arrange their future was a risky, inefficient strategy. Why wait? A valuable alliance could be snatched up by a rival family. A favorable property line could be redrawn by someone else. Securing the future meant acting now, and so children were formally engaged at an age that is to us frankly horrifying. The official age at which a child could be betrothed was 7. This was based on the Church's concept of the aetas discretionis, or the age of reason. At 7 years old, it was believed a child was capable of understanding speech, of distinguishing right from wrong, and therefore of giving meaningful consent to a promise. Of course, the idea that a 7-year-old can meaningfully consent to a lifelong legally binding union is absurd, but it was a convenient legal fiction. You would be stood before a priest or a notary, your hand placed in the hand of your equally bewildered fiancé. You'd be told to repeat some words stumbling over the formal language or the unfamiliar Latin. To you, it sounds like nonsense syllables, maybe a new kind of nursery rhyme. But with those words, you have just made a vow de futuro, a legally recognized promise to marry in the future. This wasn't a play date, it was the first step in a binding contract. The most extreme versions of this were the so-called cradle betrothals, which were particularly common among the highest echelons of royalty, where a single marriage could seal a peace treaty or unite kingdoms. One of the most famous historical examples is that of Isabella of Valois, daughter of the French king, who was formally betrothed to the 29-year-old King Richard II of England in 1396. She was 6 years old. The arrangement was purely political, a desperate bid to secure a truce in the 100 Years' War. The little girl was sent to England, a queen in title, but a child in reality, a tiny pawn in a massive political game. For you, a 7-year-old child of a lesser noble or a well-to-do merchant, the stakes are smaller, but the reality is the same. The dowry is the key. The transaction isn't just a promise. It's often sealed immediately with a transfer of assets. Your father doesn't just pledge the dowry. He pays a substantial portion of it up front. A bag of silver coins, the deed to a forest, or a flock of sheep might be handed over on the day of your betrothal. You might be secretly thrilled about the sheep, already imagining picking out your favorite one to be your special pet. Your father is thrilled because he just locked in a deal that gives him grazing rights on his new ally's land for the next 2 decades. This down payment made the contract incredibly difficult to break. To go back on the deal would mean returning the dowry, often with a hefty financial penalty, not to mention the public shame and the loss of a valuable alliance. Historians debate how often these childhood betrothals actually culminated in a marriage. A great deal could change in the years between the promise and the wedding day. One of the children could die, a tragically common occurrence. A family's fortunes could rise or fall dramatically. A war or a political shift could turn allied families into bitter enemies overnight. So while the contract felt permanent to you, the 7-year-old at its center, its real-world chances of survival were subject to the turbulent winds of medieval life. Court records are filled with petitions to dissolve these childhood agreements based on these changing circumstances. But assuming the contract held your childhood would be fundamentally altered. You would grow up knowing who you belong to. In many cases, especially among the nobility, you might be sent to live in the household of your future in-laws. This practice, known as fostering, served a dual purpose. It ensured you were educated in the customs of your new family, and it also made you a high-value hostage, a living, breathing guarantee that your family would hold up their end of the bargain. You would learn to call another woman mother, to obey another man as father, all while knowing that your presence in their home was a constant reminder of the contract that bound you all together. So, as you are led away from the ceremony, a small formal ring, perhaps tied with a ribbon to your finger, because it's far too large to wear, your childhood is effectively over. You are no longer just a child. You are a promise. You are a walking, talking legal agreement, a placeholder in a dynastic strategy, simply waiting to come of age so that the real business of the marriage, the consummation and the production of heirs, can finally be executed. The waiting is over. The years between 7 and 12 have passed in a strange blur of duty and expectation. You have grown up knowing your fate was tied to a boy, who was for a long time just a name and a face you saw on feast days. Now the day has come. You are 12 years old, the minimum age of marital consent according to the laws of the church. Your fiancé, now a lanky, awkward 14, stands beside you. You are not inside the hallowed sanctuary of the church, not yet. You are on the porch, at the very threshold, with the entire village gathered in the churchyard to watch. This is where the legal magic happens, and it all hinges on one single complicated thing: your consent. Here, we encounter one of the great paradoxes of the medieval world. In the 12th century, Pope Alexander III had established a doctrine that would shape Western marriage for 1,000 years: consensus facit nuptias. Consent makes the marriage. On paper, this was a revolutionary and surprisingly progressive idea. It meant that the ultimate authority on whether a marriage was valid rested not with the parents, not with a priest, and not even with the act of consummation, but with the freely given verbal consent of the two individuals involved. Your "I do" was technically the most powerful part of the entire ceremony. Without it, no marriage could legally exist. It sounds empowering, doesn't it? A flicker of individual right in an oppressive world. But now let's look at your reality standing on that cold stone porch. The priest turns to you. He asks the question in formal Latin, or perhaps the local vernacular. Do you take this man, whose name you barely know, to be your lawful, wedded husband? All eyes are on you. You can feel the collective breath of the village being held. You glance at your father. His face is a stony mask, but his hand is gripping your arm just a little too tightly, a silent, painful reminder of your duty. You see your mother in the crowd, her expression a desperate plea, her mind, no doubt, flashing through the years of spinning and weaving that went into your dowry. The priest is waiting. He asks if you consent freely. This is the medieval version of the "I have read and agree to the terms and conditions" checkbox. You don't really have a choice, and no one expects you to, but you still have to click the box. Your consent is free. only in the sense that a rock is free to fall downwards when it's dropped from a great height. Let's consider your options, shall we? On the one hand, you have option A, say, I do, and fulfill the contract that has defined your entire life. You will do your duty to your family, secure the alliance, and take your designated place in the social order. Then there is option B. What happens if you say no? What if you find a flicker of courage and refuse? The consequences are swift and catastrophic. First, you bring immediate and profound public shame upon your family. The deal collapses. The carefully negotiated transfer of land money and influence evaporates. Your family is disgraced, their word proven worthless. Second, there are the financial penalties. Your father would likely have to repay any portion of the dowry already received, perhaps with an added fine for breaking the contract. This could be financially ruinous. And third, what becomes of you? You are now a pariah, a disobedient, untrustworthy daughter, whom no other respectable family will touch. Your future shrinks to a few grim possibilities, a life of unpaid drudgery as the spinster aunt in your brother's home, constantly reminded of the shame you caused. Or you could be sent to a convent, which for a girl with no true religious calling was less a spiritual retreat and more a lifetime prison sentence. So when faced with the multiple choice test of your life, the answer is pre-filled. Don't for a moment think the groom is having a much better time. He is 14. He has likely been told his entire life that this is his duty. He would almost certainly rather be out hunting rabbits or training with a sword. But he, too, is under immense pressure. A refusal from him would be a grave insult to your family, possibly sparking a feud, and would result in his own father's wrath, which could mean disinheritance or a character-building reassignment to mucking out the stables for the rest of his adolescence. The church itself was in a difficult position. What if years later you went to an ecclesiastical court and claimed your consent was coerced? Historians and legal scholars still debate how these courts handled such cases. To invalidate a marriage, you had to prove you consented under dire threat, fear of death, or serious bodily harm. But the court would have to weigh your word against your family's, and a father's stern command, a mother's tears, the threat of being disowned. These were generally seen as legitimate parental guidance, not illegal force. The system was designed to uphold the authority of the family unit, not the will of the individual. The sheer power of the consent rule did lead to a quirky and chaotic loophole, the clandestine marriage. Because consent was the only absolute requirement a couple could and often did marry themselves simply by finding a private spot and exchanging vows in the present tense, I take you as my wife, husband. Without witnesses or a priest, these marriages were still technically valid in the eyes of the church, and they caused endless legal nightmares for families whose own arranged matches were suddenly thwarted. The church despised this practice because it was unregulated, but it proves the power of the principle. It also explains why families and communities were so insistent on the public ceremony at the church door. It was a way to control the narrative to ensure that consent was given in the correct way under the watchful eye of all. So you stand there, the weight of a dozen years of expectation pressing down on you. You look at the strange boy beside you at the sea of faces at your father's iron grip. You open your mouth, and a small voice, a voice you barely recognize as your own, says the word, I do. The sound vanishes into the air, but it has done its job. Your consent, manufactured and extracted, has been given. The contract is now absolute. That small, coerced "I do" has been spoken. The sound has settled, and the contract is sealed. But what that vow actually accomplishes, what it means for your life, depends entirely on who you are. The purpose of a peasant's marriage is not the same as a prince's. So for a moment, let's leave the dusty village churchyard behind. You are no longer the daughter of a simple farmer or merchant. Imagine instead that you are draped in velvet and silk. You are the daughter of a duke, a powerful count, or a baron, whose lands stretch as far as the eye can see. Your blood is not merely blood. It is a currency, a lineage, a political asset. And your marriage is the single most important transaction your family will ever conduct. For the elite of medieval Europe, marriage was the primary engine of statecraft. It was a cold, calculated move on a vast and brutal chessboard, a game played for the highest stakes, imaginable land power, and the fate of kingdoms. Think of it as a hostile takeover, but instead of trading stocks, you trade daughters. A wedding ring becomes more powerful than a sword, and the marriage bed becomes a theater of dynastic ambition. Your personal feelings are not just irrelevant, they are a potential liability to the strategic interests of your house. Your union is designed to achieve very specific goals. It might be to forge an alliance uniting your father's power with another great lord's, to create a block so strong it can challenge the authority of the king himself. Your family crest might feature a lion and his a dragon. The goal of this marriage is to create a new combined coat of arms, a public declaration of a new superpower. The hope is that the lion and dragon will learn to share a shield without mauling each other, a hope that applies just as much to the couple as it does to their armies. Perhaps the most famous example of marriage's power play is the union of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152. Eleanor was not just any bride. She was by inheritance the Duchess of Aquitaine, a vast and wealthy territory in southwestern France. Fresh from an annulled marriage to the pious King of France, she was the single most eligible and powerful heiress in Europe. Henry was the young, ambitious Duke of Normandy. When they married, their territories merged. His lands in the north of France combined with her massive duchy in the south. 2 years later, he became King of England. Suddenly, their combined territory, the Angevin Empire, stretched from the borders of Scotland all the way to Spain. It was a colossal political entity that dwarfed the personal lands of the French king, and it was created not by a single great war, but by a single strategic wedding. Historians still debate the extent to which a formidable woman like Eleanor was the architect of her own marital destiny. Was her marriage to Henry her own shrewd political move after ditching her first husband, or was she primarily a pawn pressured by her own vassals to choose a strong protector for her lands? Either way, their famously stormy and often hateful partnership, which produced multiple sons who would war with their own father, was all about the relentless pursuit and maintenance of power. This brings us to a quirky detail of these high-stakes unions, the proxy marriage. When a king in England was to marry a princess in Spain, it was impractical for them to be in the same place for the ceremony. The wedding would go on anyway, with a high-ranking nobleman acting as a stand-in for the groom. This proxy would speak the vows, and in some traditions, even proceed to the bedding ceremony. He would lie down on the marriage bed beside the new bride, but with a naked sword placed between them, a potent symbol that the marriage was now legally binding, but had not yet been physically consummated. It's a stark illustration of how impersonal these contracts were. The legal act was everything. The presence of the actual person was secondary. The value of a royal bride depended heavily on local inheritance laws, a mainstream fact that dictated much of European politics. In France, the infamous Salic law forbade women from inheriting the throne. This meant marrying a French princess was good for securing an alliance, but it wouldn't get you the kingdom. In other realms, however, like Castile in Spain, a woman could rule in her own right. This made the marriage of an heiress, like Queen Isabella I of Castile, astronomically significant. Her marriage to Ferdinand II, a Mesocorbintasash of Aragon in 1469, is the ultimate story of a successful political merger. They were heirs to the two largest and most powerful kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula. Their union was a deliberate strategic move to fuse their realms, creating what would become the unified Kingdom of Spain. Together, they centralized power, completed the centuries-long Reconquista by conquering the last Muslim stronghold in Granada, and famously funded Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. The Spanish Empire, a global superpower for over a century, was built on the foundation of their marriage. It was without a doubt the most successful and consequential business arrangement of the 15th century. For you, the noble pawn in this game, life is a gilded cage. Your honeymoon is not a romantic getaway. It's a formal, exhausting tour of your new domains, showing your face to your new subjects and reminding them who is in charge. Your wedding night and every night after is overshadowed by a single, immense pressure: you must produce a male heir. Your friendly pillow talk might consist of discussing the importance of having a spare son, just in case the first one doesn't survive childhood. It's all about succession planning. Your body is not your own. It is a vessel for the dynasty. Your life's purpose is to be the link between a glorious past and a powerful future, and your own chapter is simply a means to that end. But while your prison may be lined with velvet for the vast majority of the population, the prison of marriage was built of rougher stuff for a much more desperate purpose. Let us now strip away the velvet and the silk, the talk of empires and alliances. Forget the cold, grand halls of power. Come back down to the earth, to the mud and the sweat and the turning of the seasons. You are no longer a noble pawn in a game of thrones. You are the daughter of a peasant farmer, a blacksmith, or a village weaver. Your hands are not soft and pale. They are calloused and strong. Your world is not one of maps and treaties, but of the wind, the rain, and the single overwhelming question that governs every moment of your life: will there be enough food to survive the winter? For you, and for the overwhelming majority of the medieval population, marriage is not a political tool. It is a grimly practical arrangement, a strategy for survival. You are not marrying to climb the social ladder. For a peasant or a serf, there is no ladder to climb. You are marrying to create a viable economic unit, to forge a partnership against starvation. Think of your household not as a home, but as a small, perpetually struggling family business. Your marriage is the founding partnership, and the primary goal isn't profit. It is to avoid going bankrupt before the spring thaw. The division of labor is absolute and relentless. A man cannot run a peasant holding on his own. He performs the heavy agricultural labor, plowing the fields with the precious family ox, if they have one, scything the hay and maintaining the tools. But that is only half the work. He needs a wife. You, as the wife, are responsible for what was called the distaff side of the economy. This includes tending the kitchen garden, which provides much of the family's vegetables. It means raising the chickens for eggs and the occasional feast day meat. It means milking the cow or the goat and churning the butter. It means spinning wool or flax into thread weaving cloth and sewing the family's rough homespun garments. It means baking the coarse dark bread, that is the staple of your diet, and crucially brewing the weak watery ale that is often safer to drink than the local water. And when the harvest comes, you are expected to be in the fields alongside your husband, reaping and binding sheaves until your back screams in protest. You are not a partner in romance. You are a partner in labor. This intense codependency was baked into the very structure of peasant life, specifically through agricultural systems like the three-field system. This was a mainstream feature of medieval farming, where the village's arable land was divided into three massive fields. One was planted in the autumn with wheat or rye. The second was planted in the spring with oats, barley, or beans. And the third was left fallow to recover its nutrients. Your family didn't own a neat square farm. Instead, you held the rights to work a number of individual strips scattered across all three of these giant fields. This meant that plowing and harvesting had to be done communally, but the success or failure of your specific strips depended on your family's own relentless effort. A lazy husband or an inefficient wife could mean the ruin of your harvest and therefore your family. So when your marriage is arranged, the negotiations are intensely practical. The most romantic thing your future husband might say to you is, "Your spinning is very consistent, and the ale you brewed for the last feast hasn't gone sour yet." This is high praise indeed. Your dowry isn't a castle or a title. It is a collection of essential life-sustaining goods: a new cooking pot, a sturdy wool blanket, perhaps a spinning wheel, 2 chickens, and a reputation for not burning the pottage. Your father might throw in a piglet if he's feeling particularly generous, and your future father-in-law is a good drinking buddy. These are the assets that matter. Historians debate how much genuine choice commoners had in their partners compared to the absolute directives of the nobility. While your parents still made the final decision, there may have been more room for personal preference. A noble father could afford to marry his daughter to a man she despised if it gained him a fortress. A peasant father, however, had to consider the practical consequences of a miserable match. An unwilling, sullen, or resentful partner was an inefficient worker. A daughter who truly couldn't stand her potential husband might work so slowly and poorly that she would become a liability. A complaint like, "He is ugly," would be dismissed. But a complaint like, "He is lazy and a drunkard, and he will let our strips in the north field become overgrown with weeds," was a serious economic argument that a pragmatic father might actually listen to. Even in this humble setting, your life and your marriage were not entirely your own. They belonged in a way to the lord of the manor. This is highlighted by a quirky and rather unpleasant tidbit, the feudal fee known as merchet. This was a fine a serf had to pay to his lord whenever his daughter got married. Why? Because you, as a serf, were part of the lord's property, a source of labor on his estate. When you married, your labor might be transferred to another manor, or at the very least refocused on your new family unit. The merchet was the lord's compensation for this loss of his asset. It was a literal tax on your right to have a personal life, a stark reminder of your place at the bottom of the feudal pyramid. Your shared dream as a couple isn't to travel or find personal fulfillment. It is the simple, desperate hope of achieving a harvest that's just large enough to pay the Lord's crushing taxes, feed your family through the winter, and have enough seed left over to plant next spring. That's it. That is the pinnacle of success. Marriage, then, is a prison of practicality. It is a lifelong sentence of shared hardship, a cage built not of gilded bars, but of rough-hewn logs, mud walls, and the sheer grinding necessity of survival. But whether you were a noble or a peasant, once the deal was struck and the vows were spoken, you were funneled into the same next step, the public ritual that made it all official in the eyes of God and the community. So here you are. It does not matter now if your dress is imported silk embroidered with pearls or rough, undyed, homespun wool. It doesn't matter if your future promises a life of political maneuvering from within a stone fortress or a life of backbreaking labor in a muddy field. Whether you are a noble or a peasant, you are funneled to this exact same spot. You are standing at the threshold of the church on the porch under the open sky. This is where your new life begins, not in a private ceremony with cherished loved ones, but in a loud, bustling public spectacle. The reason you are outside is one of the most misunderstood aspects of medieval marriage. In the eyes of the law and the community, your wedding is first and foremost a legal contract, a secular event. The church porch, known in Latin as in facie ecclesiae, in the face of the church, was a public space, a liminal zone between the sacred interior of the church and the secular world of the village square. This is where legal matters were often witnessed and proclaimed. The priest is present, yes, but at this stage his primary role is to act as an official witness for the community, ensuring the proper words are said, and the contract is publicly acknowledged. He is more notary than holy man in this moment. Look around you. This is not an invite-only affair with a carefully curated guest list. There is no bouncer with a clipboard. If you live within the sound of the church bells, you are on the guest list by default. Forget worrying about who to put on the B list for your reception. Everyone is on the A list. The village gossip, the blacksmith, the reeve who collects the Lord's taxes, that strange old woman who mumbles to her chickens. They are all here, and their presence is not incidental. It is essential. They are the witnesses. Their collective memory is what validates your marriage, what prevents your new husband from later claiming it never happened. It is the original social media status update, performed live for the entire server. This practice was formally codified by the Church at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, a major historical event that sought to regulate and control marriage across Christendom. The council mandated that weddings be public events performed by a priest and that they be preceded by the announcement of the banns. This was a direct assault on the chaotic world of clandestine marriages we talked about earlier. By forcing the ceremony out into the open, the church could prevent bigamy, ensure no forbidden kinship ties were being violated, and solidify marriage as a stable, observable institution, which was crucial for the orderly transfer of property and inheritance. Getting married on the porch was also brutally practical. If someone had a legitimate last-minute objection, stop. He's already married to my cousin in the next village. They didn't have to awkwardly interrupt a solemn service. They could just shout it from the back of the crowd. It's a system that's remarkably efficient, if a bit prone to drama. You stand there as the priest begins the rite. You may have to shout your vows to be heard over the sound of a nearby cow, a barking dog, or a crying baby. It is less a sacred whisper between two souls and more a broadcast over a faulty public announcement system, ensuring everyone has heard you and that there are no takebacks later. Of course, historians debate the uniformity of this ceremony across the vast and varied landscape of medieval Europe. While the in facie ecclesiae model was the ideal promoted from Rome, how closely was it really followed in a remote fishing village in Ireland or an alpine valley with strong pre-Christian traditions? The official rite was often just one layer in a palimpsest of local folk customs. The blessing of a local wise woman, the jumping over a broomstick, the sharing of a specific type of ritual cake. These older traditions likely blended with the new, creating a unique ceremony in each locale. Only after the legal business is concluded on the porch, after the vows are exchanged, and the consent is witnessed, does the wedding party move inside. You cross the threshold now as a married couple. Here inside the sacred space of the church, you will attend a nuptial mass. This is the second part of the proceedings, the religious seal, on the already completed legal contract. The priest will offer prayers and give a blessing for your union, for your fertility, and for your new household. It's a solemn moment, but it's critical to understand that it does not make the marriage. It sanctifies a marriage that already exists. And once the blessing is done, the community's role shifts from witness to participant. In many places, the solemnity would give way to a church ale or bride ale. This was a quirky and wonderful mix of a party and a fundraiser. You, as the new bride, might have brewed a special large batch of ale. The whole village would celebrate drinking and feasting, and they would pay for the ale they consumed. The profits from the sale would then be given to you and your husband to help establish your new home. It was a form of community crowdfunding, a tangible investment by the village in the success of the new household they had just seen created. So as the formal part of the day concludes, you are well and truly married. The contract has been witnessed, the union has been blessed, and the celebration has begun. But within that public ritual, on the church porch, a series of small symbolic gestures took place. The giving of your hand, the placing of the ring, the lifting of the veil. These actions performed in plain sight carried a weight far beyond simple tradition. They were quiet, powerful rituals of control, signifying exactly what this new relationship was all about. Let's zoom in. In the midst of the public spectacle on the church porch, a single quiet action takes place. The priest, having asked the crucial questions of consent, now motions for your father to step forward. He takes your right hand in his. You know the feel of this hand. It is the hand that might have held yours when you were a small child, but it is also the hand of the man who holds absolute legal authority over you, the hand that disciplined you, the hand that signed the contract for your marriage. Now in front of God and the entire village, he places your hand directly into the waiting palm of your new husband. The transfer is complete. This gesture, so familiar to us from modern weddings, was not a sentimental moment of a father giving his daughter away. It was the literal, physical symbol of a legal transaction. It was the moment your legal guardianship was formally passed from one man to another. Think of it less as a heartfelt send-off and more as the signing over of a deed. Your father might perform the action with the same grave solemnity he would use to hand over the ownership papers for the family's most valuable field. In some legal interpretations of the time, the field might have had a clearer path to independent recognition. This action is the physical representation of a deeply embedded legal doctrine that defined the lives of almost all married women in the Middle Ages and for centuries after the doctrine of coverture. Once you speak your vows and your hand is transferred, you become what the law calls a feme, covert, a covered woman. The legal theory was that upon marriage, a husband and wife become a single entity in the eyes of the law, and that single entity is the husband. Your independent legal identity, the one you possessed as an unmarried woman, feme soul, is completely erased or covered by his. It is the legal equivalent of your personal social media profile being permanently deleted with all your past and future posts now appearing automatically under your husband's account name. You don't get a new identity. Your old one is simply absorbed. The consequences of this are staggering. As a feme covert, you have virtually no legal personhood. Any property you owned before the marriage, your dowry of land money, or even the clothes on your back, now legally belongs to your husband. He has the right to manage it, lease it, sell it, or even squander it on gambling, and you have absolutely no legal power to stop him. You cannot sign a contract on your own. This means no starting a small business, no taking out a loan, and certainly no signing up for the medieval equivalent of the Jelly of the Month Club. You cannot sue someone in court, nor can you be sued. If someone wrongs you, your husband must bring the case on your behalf. If you commit a minor crime, he is held responsible. You have no legal right to your own earnings if you do work for pay, and most chillingly, you have no legal authority over the children you bear. Your husband is their sole legal guardian. The rationale provided for this system was, of course, that it was for your own good. The world of law, property, and finance was considered too complex and corrupting for the delicate female mind. Coverture was framed as a form of protection, a legal blanket that shielded you from the harsh realities of public life. But for many women, this protective blanket must have felt a lot like being slowly and methodically smothered by stacks of parchment and official seals. The public nature of this property transfer was often put on full display with a quirky custom known as the bride's wain or bridal wagon. This was the cart often decorated with ribbons and flowers that would transport all of your dowry goods, your chest of linens, your pots and pans, your spinning wheel, in a formal procession from your father's house to your new husband's house. The entire village would watch as your worldly possessions were trundled down the lane to their new home and new master. It was a parade that made the abstract legal concept of your property transfer unmistakably real for all to see. Now, legal historians debate the degree to which coverture was absolute in all situations. While the law on paper was rigid, real life was often messier. Shrewd families could sometimes create trusts or use loopholes in church law to give a daughter some control over her dowry, managed through a trusted male relative, like an uncle or brother. Furthermore, the concept of a dower, or dower rights, provided a crucial exception. Your dower was the portion of your husband's estate, typically 1/3 to which you were legally entitled for the duration of your life should you become a widow. This was a hugely important right. It ensured that a widow wouldn't be left destitute and gave her a significant degree of economic power and independence that she never had as a wife. This complicates the simple picture of total female subjugation, suggesting the law was more concerned with the stability of the family unit and the protection of widows than with granting rights to wives. But that is a distant future prospect. In this moment on the church porch, the reality is simple and stark. The warmth of your father's hand has been replaced by the unfamiliar feel of your husband's. The gesture took only a second, but in that second, your legal existence vanished. You walk to this spot as your father's daughter, a person in your own right, however limited. You will walk away from it as someone's wife, a legal shadow. And this profound transfer of ownership is about to be sealed with yet another powerful symbol. A small circular object to be placed on your hand as a perpetual reminder of who you now belong to. The legal transfer is done. Your hand passed from father to husband. Now this new ownership is about to be sealed with a symbol you will wear for the rest of your life. Your groom produces a ring. For a commoner, it might be a simple sturdy band of iron or bronze. For the wealthy, perhaps silver or gold, maybe, with a single uncut gemstone. He slides it onto your finger. You might think this is a circle of eternal love, a promise of fidelity, and in time, it might come to represent that. But its original meaning is far colder and more practical. The tradition of the wedding ring comes directly from ancient Rome. The Roman annulus pronubis was not a romantic gift. It was a ring of betrothal given to a bride's father, a pledge to seal a contract. It signified that a down payment on the dowry had been made and the deal was locked in. This tradition, absorbed and adapted by the medieval church, carried its legal and commercial DNA forward. The ring you now wear is the final clasp on a legal document. It is a public marker, a brand telling all other men that you are now the exclusive property of another. The message it sends to the community is not so much "I am loved" as it is, "This property is under new management, and trespassers will be prosecuted." One of those messages was definitely intended to be louder than the other. A fascinating, quirky variation of this is the Gimel ring, which became popular in later centuries, but had its roots in this period. It was a ring comprised of 2, sometimes 3 interlocking hoops. During the betrothal period, you and your fiancé would each wear one of the separate hoops. Then here, at the wedding ceremony, the 2 bands would be joined together to form a single complete ring that you, the wife, would wear from that day forward. It is a beautiful, tangible symbol of the legal principle of coverture, 2 independent entities being mechanically and permanently fused into one. Now let's consider the veil covering your face. You can see the crowd only as a blur of shapes and colors. Their sounds are muffled distant. This is not just about creating a dramatic reveal or signifying bridal modesty. The veil, like the ring, served a deeply practical and romantic purpose. Firstly, it protected the deal. In an arranged marriage, where the bride and groom may have never met or had only seen each other briefly, the veil hid your face until after the vows were irrevocably spoken. This prevented the groom from getting a bad case of last-minute cold feet and backing out of the contract if he found you not to his liking. It's a bit like buying a valuable item online based on a slightly blurry, unverified photograph. The seller doesn't want you inspecting it too closely until the payment has gone through. Secondly, the veil was a shield meant to protect you, the valuable asset, from harm. It was thought to ward off the evil eye and deflect curses sent by jealous rivals who might wish to spoil your fertility and thus ruin the entire purpose of the union. So, the ring marks you as property, and the veil protects that property. But what if the property tries to make a run for it? Or what if someone else tries to steal it? That brings us to the man standing near your husband, the one we would now call the best man. He is not here to offer moral support or to make sure the groom remembered the rings. He is here to provide security. His role is deadly serious. Historians and folklorists debate the precise origins of the best man. One theory is that he is a relic of an earlier, more brutal marriage by capture tradition, where a groom and his warrior friends would literally raid a neighboring tribe to abduct a bride. In this scenario, the best man was simply the best warrior, the groom's most capable accomplice in the kidnapping. While that practice was rare by the high Middle Ages, the best man's role as an armed guard remained. He had two primary functions. The first was to act as the bride's guard. He would stand close to you during the ceremony at the church door to ensure you didn't have a change of heart and make a dramatic dash for the woods. If you were thinking of staging a medieval runaway bride, moment you'd first have to get past this so-called best man, a man likely chosen for his ability to run fast and tackle hard. He was not your supportive friend. He was your captor's enforcer. His second, and perhaps more common role, was to be the groom's bodyguard. High-status weddings, which secured valuable land or forged powerful alliances, could be flashpoints for violence. A spurned rival suitor might show up with his own men to challenge the groom or try to steal you away. An enemy family might see the wedding as the perfect opportunity to ambush two powerful families gathered in one place. The best man and the groomsman were an armed squadron, a security detail tasked with protecting the wedding party and ensuring the contract was executed without violent interruption. So let's reassess the scene. You stand on the church porch, your identity legally erased. On your finger is a ring that marks you as owned. Over your face is a veil that conceals and protects you like a valuable parcel. And standing guard is a man whose job is to ensure you can't escape and no one else can take you. These are not symbols of love and celebration. They are a powerful trio of ritualistic control understood by everyone present. The public spectacle is now mostly complete. The legal transfer is done. The deal is sealed. The community has borne witness. The daylight portion of your wedding day is drawing to a close. But the ultimate validation of the marriage, the most crucial proof of the contract, is yet to come, and it will happen under the cover of darkness. The last of the bride ale has been drunk. The final verses of the boisterous songs have faded, and the communal feasting has wound down. The daylight portion of your wedding, the public legal contract, is over. Now, as dusk settles, you are led away from the noise of the great hall or the village green. A procession of family members, holding flickering torches or candles, escorts you towards the bedchamber. The mood shifts. The raucous celebration gives way to a tense, expectant silence. You are walking towards a different kind of performance, a private ritual that is in many ways more important than the public one. Now the real test begins. You cross the threshold into the room that has been prepared for you. Herbs like lavender and meadowsweet might be strewn across the floor, their scent a thin mask for the everyday smells of smoke and life. The centerpiece of the room is the bed, likely the most valuable piece of furniture the family owns. It is prepared with the best linen sheets, a part of your dowry, clean and white. And as you stand there, you are acutely aware that everything, your future, your safety, your family's honor, and the entire legal and economic foundation of this marriage hinges on one invisible biological fact. your virginity. In the medieval world, a bride's virginity was not simply a private matter of morality or a sign of religious piety. It was a tangible asset of immense value, the cornerstone of the marital transaction. Its importance rested on two mighty pillars: family honor and the legitimacy of heirs. Your family's obsession with your purity was less about your immortal soul and more like a priceless art collector, being fanatically protective of a vase, ensuring it remains in its original pristine, unopened packaging. It's all about its value at the point of transfer. First, your virginity was a direct reflection of your family's honor. A daughter was considered the property of her father. Her chastity was a measure of his ability to control his household and guard his possessions. To deliver a virgin bride to the groom's family was to demonstrate that your own family was strong, disciplined, and honorable. It proved they could successfully protect their assets. Conversely, a bride found not to be a virgin brought catastrophic shame upon her entire lineage. It suggested her father and brothers were weak, negligent rulers of their own home, unable to control their womenfolk, a serious blow to their reputation in a world built on perceptions of strength. This leads to the glaring double standard of the age. While you have spent your entire life under constant surveillance, being told that an unsupervised conversation with a boy from the next village could lead to social ruin, your new husband has likely faced no such restrictions. A young man's premarital experiences were often ignored, tolerated, or even encouraged as a necessary part of growing up, a way to sow his wild oats. His oats apparently were heroic and adventurous, while yours were a source of treason and disgrace. But the second pillar, the legitimacy of heirs, was even more critical, especially for any family with property to its name. The entire patrilineal system of inheritance, the bedrock of social order, depended on the absolute certainty that the eldest son was the biological offspring of the husband. Land titles, wealth, and power were all passed down from father to son. This is where your virginity became less a moral virtue and more a crucial piece of legal evidence. It was a high-stakes paternity test conducted before the fact. Your body was the laboratory, and your purity was the control sample that guaranteed the first experiment would be valid. The legal and social status of an illegitimate child, a bastard, was a mainstream fact of life, and it was brutal. A child born outside of a legitimate marriage had no right to inherit their father's name, titles, or property in most of Europe. They were a walking, talking symbol of sin and social disorder. For a duke whose entire life was about ensuring his duchy passed to his son, or a peasant who needed his small strip of land to go to his own child, the fear of an illegitimate heir was all-consuming. Your virginity on the wedding night was the only proof your husband had that the dynasty, or the farm, would continue through his own bloodline. This obsession with control led to the enduring myth of the chastity belt. It's a powerful image, a locked iron contraption to physically enforce a woman's purity. But historians now agree these devices were largely a fantasy, a product of later Renaissance satire or 19th century imagination, not a widespread medieval reality. The real chastity belt was not made of iron. It was forged from fear, constant social surveillance by family and neighbors, and the powerful threat of eternal damnation preached from the pulpit every Sunday. Historians do debate, however, how this obsession with virginity differed between social classes. For the nobility, where the inheritance of a kingdom could be at stake, it was an absolute non-negotiable requirement. For the peasantry, the situation may have been slightly more fluid. Some argue that while virginity was still highly valued, A premarital pregnancy in a poor, landless community was not necessarily the same unmitigated disaster. The overwhelming need was for children who could provide labor. A hasty wedding could legitimize the child, and the couple could get on with the business of survival. The shame was real, but it wasn't a succession crisis that could topple a dynasty. But tonight, in this room, these distinctions don't matter. The weight of expectation is the same. The door is about to close, and you will be left with this stranger, your new husband. No pressure, though. It's only your personal safety, your entire future, your family's public honor, and the very stability of your new husband's lineage riding on what happens next. Sleep tight. The sun rises, casting a pale gray light into the bedchamber. The night is over, but your ordeal is not. In many ways, it is just about to begin. The consummation, whether it was a fumbling, awkward encounter or a terrifying assault, was only the act. Now comes the audit. Soon there is a knock at the door. It is not your husband returning with a morning meal. It is a delegation of women, your new mother-in-law, your own mother, perhaps a few powerful aunts or female relatives. They enter the room with grim, purposeful expressions. There is no warmth, no gentle inquiry after your well-being. They are not here to comfort you. They are here to see the proof. This is the test of virginity, a ritual of inspection that is almost unimaginable to the modern mind. The women walk directly to the bed. They pull back the covers and lift the top sheet, the fine linen one from your dowry, holding it up to the morning light. They are searching for one thing, the blood stain that is considered the absolute irrefutable proof of your virginity. It is the most invasive form of peer review conceivable, a clinical examination where your body is the subject and the findings are about to be published immediately and very publicly. If the requisite stain is there, the atmosphere in the room changes in an instant. The tension breaks. Grim faces relax into smiles of profound relief. Your mother weeps, but this time from pride. Your mother-in-law might give you a sharp, approving nod. You have passed the test. You have proven your worth, and more importantly, you have secured the honor of both families. But the proof is not then quietly folded and put away. In many cultures, particularly around the Mediterranean, this stained cloth became a trophy. This practice has ancient roots, finding justification in passages from the Old Testament, which lent it immense cultural and religious authority. The sheet would be carried from the room and displayed for all to see, hung from a window or a balcony for the wedding guests and the entire community to observe. It was a victory flag, a public announcement that the contract was sound, the property was as advertised, and the honor of the lineage was secure. It's like winning an award, except the trophy is your own stained bed linen paraded for the whole world to applaud. But what if the sheet is clean? Imagine the silence, the cold, disbelieving stares that quickly turn to suspicion and then to open contempt. The whispers begin. The inspection becomes an interrogation. The lack of blood is taken as proof of your deception. You have failed the test, and the consequences are swift, total, and catastrophic. Your new husband has every right to repudiate you on the spot. The marriage can be immediately annulled. The logic is brutal. The contract was for a virgin bride, an undamaged asset. You have been revealed as damaged goods, and so the contract is void. It is the medieval version of "the product was not as described, I would like a full refund." The product, of course, is you, and the refund is the instant destruction of your entire future. You would be stripped of your wedding finery and sent back to your father's house in utter disgrace. You are no longer a wife, but you are not a maiden either. You are a pariah, a living symbol of your family's shame, an object of gossip and scorn. Your life is effectively over. No other respectable man will have you. Your only future is likely to be a life of penance and misery in the harshest and most remote convent your family can find a place to hide you away forever. This entire system rested on a tragic and fundamental misunderstanding of female anatomy. Historians and medical experts today know that the test of blood is completely unreliable. Not all women bleed during their first sexual encounter. The hymen can be flexible, or it can be torn years before through vigorous childhood play, horseback riding, or any number of non-sexual activities. This scientific reality was unknown in the Middle Ages. The rule was absolute and unforgiving, a ritual of terror based on ignorance that must have condemned countless innocent and terrified young women. There was so much pressure to provide the required evidence that one has to wonder about the medieval equivalent of a smuggled vial of chicken blood kept under the pillow as a desperate life-saving measure just in case. In some cases, if the physical proof was ambiguous, a desperate family might try to offer what were known as tokens of virginity. This was a frantic legal and social scramble to substitute character evidence for the missing physical proof. They might bring forth the midwife who had examined you as a child, or a priest to swear to your pious and sheltered upbringing, all in a last-ditch effort to save you and themselves from ruin. For royalty, the stakes were even higher. The failure of a royal bride to prove her virginity could spark an international crisis. When Catherine of Aragon's first marriage to the English prince Arthur ended with his death, her entire future and ultimately the religious fate of England hinged on the question of whether that first marriage had been consummated. She swore it had not been preserving her status as a virgin bride for Arthur's younger brother, the future Henry VIII. Years later, Henry would use this very point to try and annul his own marriage to her. A doubt cast upon a queen's purity was a doubt cast upon the legitimacy of her children, a spark that could ignite a brutal civil war over the succession. So you wait, holding your breath, as the women examine the cloth. Your entire world hangs in the balance, suspended on the evidence of a single stain, or the lack thereof. It is the ultimate brutal confirmation that your body is not your own, but a vessel whose contents and condition must be publicly verified. But the intrusion did not always wait for the morning. For many couples, the community didn't even give them the privacy of a single night. The morning after inspection of the sheets was a brutal intrusion, but for many couples, the violation of their privacy began far earlier. This brings us to one of the most infamous, sinister, and widely debated concepts associated with medieval life: jus primae, noctis, the right of the first night. The idea is simple and horrifying that a feudal lord had the legal right to sleep with a peasant bride on her wedding night, consummating the marriage before her own husband could. It represents the ultimate expression of a lord's power, demonstrating his absolute ownership over the lives and even the bodies of the serfs who lived on his land. It's a concept that has fueled countless dramatic novels and movies, a perfect symbol of aristocratic tyranny. There's just one problem. It almost certainly never happened. For centuries, jus primae noctis was accepted as a grim reality of the feudal system. However, modern historians almost universally challenge this, arguing that it is more myth than practice. There are virtually no reliable legal documents, court records, or chronicles that describe this rite as a real enforceable law. The consensus now is that the story likely originated from a few different sources. It may have been anti-aristocratic propaganda, a folk tale that captured the deep-seated resentment peasants felt towards their lords. It could also have been a literal-minded misunderstanding of the merchant fee we discussed earlier, the fee paid to the lord when a serf's daughter married. In a symbolic sense, the husband was buying his bride's virginity from the lord, and this financial transaction may have been twisted over time into a lurid physical one. So while a lord was certainly interested in your marriage, he was almost certainly more interested in your family's grain and tax payments than in personally beta testing your union. But just because the Lord wasn't waiting for you in the bedchamber doesn't mean you were granted a moment of peace or privacy. The real intrusion came not from one powerful man, but from everyone you knew. It was called the bedding ceremony, and it was a very real, very public, and very chaotic ritual. After the feasting and drinking, as the night wore on, it was time to put the new couple to bed. But you weren't allowed to just quietly slip away. The entire wedding party, your family, his family friends, and neighbors would form a rowdy, drunken procession, singing bawdy songs and escorting you and your husband to the bedchamber. They don't just leave you at the door. They all pile into the room. The priest might be there to sprinkle holy water on the bed and offer a prayer for fertility. Then the guests, fueled by ale and festive cheer, would ceremonially and often forcefully help undress you and the groom, all while shouting crude jokes and lewd advice. Forget a quiet romantic end to your evening. Your wedding night comes with a live studio audience, complete with hecklers. It's like being the main act in a comedy routine where you don't know the punchlines and you're not wearing any clothes. This ritual served a crucial legal purpose. As we've established, consent or consensus made a marriage. But it was consummation, the copula, that made it permanent and indissoluble. A marriage that had not been consummated could be annulled with relative ease. Therefore, having witnesses to the consummation, or at least to the fact that the couple was put into the same bed with the clear intent to consummate, made the union ironclad. It prevented either party from later trying to escape the marriage by falsely claiming it had never been physically finalized. The guests were there as legal witnesses, ensuring the final unbreakable seal was placed on the contract. Amidst the chaos, there were even stranger game-like rituals. One quirky tidbit is the stocking ceremony. After your stockings had been pulled off, the guests would gather at the foot of the bed. They would turn their backs and one by one throw the stockings over their shoulders, trying to get them to land on your or your husband's head. According to the superstition, the first person to succeed would be the next one to get married. It was a bizarre moment of carnival-like fun, injected into what was for you a deeply intimidating and humiliating ordeal. Try to imagine the reality of it from your perspective. You are a young girl, perhaps only 12 or 14. You are in a small, crowded, stuffy room filled with drunk and laughing adults. They are pulling off your clothes, manhandling you into a bed next to a boy who is still a stranger. And then finally they retreat, but they may not go far. In some customs, they would simply draw the bed curtains and wait, listening for any sounds that would confirm the deed was done. Sometimes they would wait just outside the door, not leaving, until the groom emerged to announce the marriage was complete. The marriage is now sealed twice over, It has been sealed by public vow and by witnessed consummation. The community which has negotiated, witnessed, and celebrated your union has now locked the final bolt. There is no going back. Your new life, a life of obligation, is about to begin. And that life will be governed not just by the whims of your new husband, but by another powerful institution with its own strict set of rules for what could and could not happen in the marriage bed, the church. Your marriage is now an established fact, sealed by public vow in the daylight and confirmed by physical union in the darkness. The community has witnessed it, and the law recognizes it. The door to your old life is closed and locked. But as you settle into your new existence, you discover that your life, and specifically your body, is not simply governed by your husband. There is a higher, more pervasive authority that dictates the most intimate details of your marriage, the church. Your body, having been transferred from your father's authority to your husband's, is now also subject to a complex and demanding set of rules laid down by theologians and preached from every pulpit in Christendom. The first and most fundamental rule was this: the only legitimate purpose for sexual intimacy within a marriage was procreation. That's it. It was a biological function to create heirs and to populate the world with new Christian souls. While the act itself was permissible within marriage, any pleasure you might derive from it was not. Pleasure was the domain of lust, a deadly sin. Theologians taught that to engage in the marital act with an eye toward pleasure rather than conception was to misuse the sacrament of marriage. It's like being told you are allowed to eat a piece of cake, but only for its life-sustaining nutritional value. If you dare to actually enjoy the taste, you are a glutton, and your soul is in peril. To enforce this joyless vision of intimacy, the church established a formidable calendar of forbidden days, a spiritual blackout schedule that severely limited when a couple could be together. Think of your marital life as being governed by a divine version of a corporate email server, and the church has blocked out vast sections of your calendar. Sex was forbidden on all Sundays in observance of the Lord's resurrection. It was forbidden on Wednesdays and Fridays, traditional days of penance and fasting. It was forbidden during the entire 40-day period of Lent, the 40 days before Easter. It was forbidden during Advent, the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. It was forbidden on all major feast days and saints' days, of which there were dozens. It was also forbidden while a wife was menstruating, pregnant, or nursing a child. When you tally it all up, a devout couple might find that intimacy was prohibited for more than half the year. Your marital schedule had more restricted dates than a modern budget airline ticket, and the spiritual penalties for violating the terms and conditions were infinitely worse. This leads to a strange and powerful paradox at the heart of medieval marital doctrine, the concept of the debitum conjugal, or the marital debt. This was a mainstream theological principle, articulated by church fathers like St. Augustine and refined by scholars like Thomas Aquinas. It taught that because the purpose of marriage was procreation and a remedy against sin, a husband and wife owed each other sexual access. It was a debt, a duty. As a wife, you could not refuse your husband's advances, as this would be denying him the remedy and might cause him to fall into the greater sin of seeking satisfaction outside of marriage. Denying the marital debt was a sin. In a surprising and largely theoretical nod to equality, this debt was mutual. Your husband also owed you the debitum, and he could not unilaterally decide to live a celibate life without your permission. This was meant to ensure that a pious husband couldn't deny his wife the opportunity to have children, which was her primary purpose. Of course, the social reality meant that this debt was almost exclusively demanded by men and paid by women. It was less a reciprocal arrangement and more a theological justification for a wife's complete sexual submission. It's like having a library book that's perpetually due. You can never refuse to return it, and the late fees are a one-way ticket to eternal damnation. The church's control didn't stop at the calendar. It extended to the act itself. In manuals written for priests to use in confession, known as penitentials, there were detailed discussions of which sexual acts were permissible. One quirky and telling tidbit is the intense focus on position. The only fully approved method was the one deemed most effective for conception and least likely to produce pleasure, the so-called vicar's position with the wife on her back. Any other position was often condemned as unnatural, a sign that the couple was seeking lustful pleasure rather than dutifully procreating. These transgressions came with prescribed penances, such as days or weeks of fasting on bread and water. The church was, in effect, trying to choreograph the most private moments of your life. Now historians debate how rigorously this exhaustive set of rules was actually followed by the general population. The gap between official doctrine and lived reality was likely enormous. Did the average peasant couple, exhausted from a day of manual labor and sharing a single room with their children, and maybe even a goat, really consult the liturgical calendar before falling into bed? It's hard to imagine. However, the doctrines were inescapable. People lived in genuine fear of hellfire, and the confessional was a powerful tool for enforcing these norms. Priests would ask specific probing questions about your intimate life, forcing you to measure your reality against the church's rigid ideal. Your intimate life, therefore, was not a source of comfort or connection. It was a spiritual minefield, a chore laden with anxiety and obligation. Pleasure was a sin. Spontaneity was forbidden, and your most private acts were subject to a litany of external rules. The very act of procreation, the central purpose of your marriage, was so hedged with restrictions that it became just one more duty to perform. And this marital debt was just the beginning of a lifetime of obligation you now faced as a wife. The marital debt, with its complex rules and joyless obligations, was just the first line item on the long list of duties you signed up for at the church door. Your life as a wife was a life of submission, a complete subordination of your body, your will, and your safety to your husband, all sanctified by the unassailable authority of the church. This life of obligation rested on three great pillars: the burden of constant childbearing, the duty of absolute obedience, and the accepted reality of physical punishment. Your primary function in this new life, your main job description, was heir production. But it wasn't enough to produce one child. You were expected to produce many. The brutal reality of the Middle Ages was the staggeringly high rate of infant and child mortality. A simple fever, a bout of diarrhea, or an infected scratch could easily carry off a baby or a toddler. It was not uncommon for a third of all children, and in some periods and places, as many as half, to die before the age of 5. To ensure that even one son survived to inherit the family land and title, you might have to endure 8, 10, or even more pregnancies. Your life would become a relentless, exhausting cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, and then pregnancy again, with little to no recovery time in between. And each and every one of those pregnancies was a life-threatening event for you. Childbirth was a leading cause of death for women. With no understanding of germs, no antibiotics, and no surgical interventions like the C-section, a difficult birth was often a death sentence. You could die from hemorrhage, from infection, the dreaded childbed fever, or from sheer exhaustion. To prepare for labor, you wouldn't be consulting a doctor. You would be praying, confessing your sins, and perhaps clutching a quirky amulet or religious relic, a saint's finger bone, a piece of parchment with a prayer written on it, or a special birthing girdle, all in a desperate superstitious bid to survive the ordeal. Your fertility was your greatest asset, but if you proved to be barren, you were seen as a failure, a defective tool. You were like a plow that refuses to plow. No one asks if the field itself is rocky or barren. They just blame the plow. You could face shame, public humiliation, and the threat of being set aside by your husband. The second pillar of your wifely life was absolute obedience. When you stood on the church porch, you publicly vowed to love, honor, and obey. The obey part wasn't buried in the fine print. It was the headline. The church taught that the husband was the head of the wife, just as Christ was the head of the church. Your household was a microcosm of the divine order, a little kingdom in which your husband was the king. His word was law. This meant you had no say in major family decisions. You could not travel even to the next village without his permission. To contradict him, especially in public, was an act of shameful defiance. To disobey a direct order was a sin not only against your husband, but against God himself. His opinion was the correct one, even when it was objectively demonstrably wrong. And what happened if you failed to obey? This brings us to the third and darkest pillar of your subjugation, the right of your husband to inflict moderate punishment. Your husband had the legal and moral right to physically discipline you for what he perceived as disobedience, laziness, or being shrewish. This wasn't considered abuse in the way we understand it today. It was framed as correction, a necessary tool for maintaining household order, much as one might discipline a child or a servant. This is where we encounter the infamous rule of thumb. Historians debate whether this was a formally codified law in most places or more of a piece of legal folklore, but the principle it represents was very real. The idea was that a husband could beat his wife with a stick rod or switch provided it was no thicker than his thumb. This provided a handy, if horrifying, guideline for what constituted moderate correction versus unseemly rage, which the church did frown upon. The difference between righteous discipline and sinful violence came down to a few millimeters of wood. The church and the secular authorities would rarely, if ever, intervene unless the violence was so extreme that it threatened your life or was carried out with a weapon. A slap for talking back, a push for a burnt meal, a beating with a switch for being disobedient. This was all considered a private family matter, a husband's legitimate prerogative. So your existence becomes a tightly controlled sphere of duty and fear. Your body is a vessel pushed to its limits by constant dangerous pregnancies. Your will is subordinate, erased by your public vow of obedience. And your safety is conditional, subject to your husband's moods and his right to correct you. You are trapped not just by law, not just by custom, but by a powerful theology that has sanctified your own subjugation, calling it the natural and divine order of the world. So what could you do if you couldn't bear it? If the loneliness, the beatings, or the sheer misery became too much to endure? What was your escape route? The terrible simple answer is that there was almost none. So you are trapped. Your life is a repeating cycle of dangerous childbirth, thankless labor, and submission to a man you did not choose, a man who holds the legal and moral right to discipline you physically. As you lie awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of the sleeping house, you must wonder, is there a way out? Can you not simply leave, get a divorce? The answer in the world of medieval Christendom is a resounding and absolute no. Divorce. As we understand it, the legal dissolution of a valid marriage did not exist. The Church, the ultimate authority on all matters of life and death, taught that marriage was a holy sacrament, a covenant made before God that could only be broken by death. What God has joined together. The priests preached from the Gospels, let no man put asunder. The bond was considered permanent and indissoluble. The only way out, the only tiny crack of light under the heavy door of your marriage was an annulment. But an annulment was not a divorce. It was a legal declaration that a valid marriage had never existed in the first place. And the grounds for proving this were incredibly narrow, specific, and difficult to meet. You could petition an ecclesiastical court for an annulment if you could prove, for instance, that your husband had a pre-existing valid marriage contract with another woman. You could also get one if you could prove you were related by blood or marriage within the forbidden degrees of consanguinity. If you discovered, for example, that you had accidentally married your third cousin. So you could escape a marriage for accidentally committing incest, but you could not escape a marriage to a man who was a monster. Cruelty, brutality, adultery, and profound unhappiness were not grounds for an annulment. The Church was far more concerned with maintaining the orderly lines of kinship than it was with your personal safety or suffering. The only other major grounds were non-consummation, or in some cases, impotence. But proving that your marriage had never been physically finalized was your word against your husband's, and proving impotence often led to bizarre and deeply humiliating public inspections and tests for the husband. Getting an annulment was like trying to get a full refund from a company whose customer service department is located on another planet and is only open for 5 minutes once a century. The system was designed to say no. So if the law and the Church offered no escape, what was left? In some corners of the Holy Roman Empire, there existed a quirky, desperate, and almost unbelievable last resort divorce by combat. While not common trial by combat, was a recognized legal principle in Germanic lands. In some legal texts, like the fencing manual of Hans Talhofer from 1467, lay out specific rules for how a husband and wife could settle their disputes in a duel to the death. To make the fight fair, the man would be placed in a pit, dug up to his waist, armed with 3 clubs. The woman was free to move around the edge of the pit, and she was armed with 3 stones each, wrapped in a length of cloth like a heavy swinging sling. They would then fight until one of them was incapacitated or killed. When a literal sanctioned fight to the death is one of the few viable paths to separation, it's safe to say the relationship counseling industry hasn't quite hit its stride yet. And so we see the final terrible truth. The very institution that claimed to protect the sanctity of marriage, the Church, was the architect of this inescapable prison. By insisting on a model of coerced consent, by framing intimacy as a debt, and obedience as a holy vow, by turning a blind eye to moderate violence, and by making the union permanent and indissoluble, the Church created a system where suffering was sanctified, and women in particular were left with almost no rights and no recourse. The sacred vows spoken at the church door were in reality the closing words of a property contract that trapped people in misery for the sake of social and religious stability. And now, as the last of these unsettling images of a world so different from our own begins to soften and recede, you can let the darkness behind your eyelids grow still. Allow your mind to drift away from the cold stone of the church porch and the suffocating confines of the marital bed, and feel yourself returning to the quiet safety of your own room, right here, right now. The grim realities of that distant past, with its ironclad rules and its casual cruelties, can be allowed to dissolve back into the pages of history where they belong. That world is gone, and what remains is the gentle hum of the fan in your corner, the soft weight of your own blanket, and the peaceful rhythm of your own breathing, in a world where you are safe and free. As you begin to drift towards sleep, perhaps you can hold on to a quiet sense of gratitude for the simple, miraculous freedom to choose whom you love, to build a partnership on a foundation of equality and affection, and to know that the most sacred vow of all is the one we make to cherish and respect one another, not as property, but as people. Let that peaceful thought guide you now as you let go of the day and slip gently into your dreams. Sweet dreams.